So as I was saying, we're starting the fourth panel discussion on additive manufacturing in the aerospace sector. So as you may know, the aerospace industry was one of the first industries to adopt and develop additive manufacturing. And in the earlier stages, this technology was mostly used for prototyping to reduce the lead time and cost of the prototypes. But today we're seeing that AM is transforming all segments of the aerospace industry, including commercial and military aircraft, but also space applications, missile systems, and much more. So for today's panel, we're really excited to have on the three speakers to discuss the applications of AM in aerospace and also the opportunities it offers compared to traditional manufacturing methods. So we have kind of the unique perspective of three very different perspectives. We have a kind of institutional perspective with Paul Gradl today from NASA, but also a more commercial perspective with Virgin Orbit, and then Brian, who's from MELTIO, a manufacturer of machines, metal additive manufacturing machines. So we have very interesting speakers today that are going to present actually their work and their role in just a second. I'm just wondering if you can all see my screen. You can double click if you want to see the presentation in a larger format, but I'm going to let Paul start introducing himself.
Great, thanks, Carlota. My name is Paul Grado. I'm a senior propulsion engineer with NASA Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. And I've been working metal additive manufacturing for about 10 years from the component development side. So we're looking at components for liquid rocket engines, and we're focused on a variety of metal AM processes, the laser powder bed fusion, laser powder directed energy deposition, laser wire directed energy deposition, and the arc wire direct energy deposition. And from the government side, we probably have a unique perspective because we certainly have alignment with additive manufacturing for our direct missions, but we're also trying to do a lot of development for low TRL technology and applications and infusing some of that data out to industry with the objective of trying to reduce our overall mission cost and the cost of some of our prime contractors and vendors as well. So the chart that you have there, you can see a variety of different applications that we've been developing and a series of the hot fire testing that we've completed on these parts. Again, in combustion chambers, nozzles, injectors, turbo machinery. So a variety of applications in both large and small scale.
Okay, great. Is it changing slide? Yeah. Oh, sorry. Good. Brian, if you want to go on.
Okay, hello everybody. My name is Brian Mathews and I'm the CTO of MELTIO. So I have about 5 years experience in additive manufacturing, which is not a lot of experience, but I come from an industry which has very exacting requirements for quality control and engineering in general, especially materials, which is the nuclear industry. So I came from that sort of very high requirements background, and that industry gave me a very unique perspective about technology, manufacturing technology, and really inspired me to think about, how can we build the machine that builds the machine. And I felt like at the time there was a lot of exciting things on the brink, on the horizon in terms of technology. But the more I dug into this, the more I realized there was an opportunity to really take things to the next level. So I got involved in AM 5 years ago, and MELTIO is the result of 5 years of intensive R&D and a lot of development of different systems, different technologies. We have a very unique system, unique technology in the market, which we really believe is going to have tremendous benefits to aerospace in general. And again, that background in materials development, in requirements, codes and standards is something that really drives us. So we're very application focused. And this is something that we're very proud to be a part of this event. This is the first of many events for us, I think. And it's just, even though we're a manufacturer of many technologies, we do have a very strong application focus. So happy to be here, and nice to meet you all.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Kevin.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kevin Zagorski. I'm the manager of Propulsion Advanced Manufacturing at Virgin Orbit. And the focus of my team and my role in our organization is effectively to look at some of the new advanced technologies, additive manufacturing and other manufacturing technologies to really figure out better ways to build rocket engines. We have a launch vehicle that we've designed and developed in-house called Launcher One. It's an air-launched small satellite launch vehicle for putting satellites roughly the size of a normal refrigerator into orbit. Because we're trying to introduce technologies and manufacturing methods that allow us to launch more cheaply, with higher performance and more quickly than anyone's ever been able to do before. We've really looked deeply into a lot of these new metal additive technologies to see where we can leverage them, where they make sense to incorporate into our rocket engines. And you can see on my slide, we've got some examples of some of the development parts, some of the testing that we've done so far. One of them is probably the same image from one of Paul's images, because we've collaborated on some projects with NASA, which has been a great help to our team. And we're working really hard to advance the state of the art with additive with respect to rocket engines, and I think we've made some good progress so far.
Okay, great. So actually my first question is quite general, but I think it's important to start the discussion. And also for anyone that's watching that doesn't know much about the adoption of this technology in aerospace, why do we use AM in aerospace in the first place? What are the main benefits, if you will? And more generally, what is the added value of integrating AM for these aerospace applications? It's a general one, and maybe we could do 45 minutes on this, but I think it's important to start the discussion.
I'll start off on this one. I think from looking at a rocket engine perspective, there's probably three factors why we look at additive manufacturing. And it's the intersection of these that you're really going to get the advantage. Now, first one being complexity. A lot of the parts that we're using for rocket engines, aerospace, are highly complex. We have to lightweight these parts. So you're trying to reduce ounces in some areas, and additive manufacturing allows for very localized weight reduction. The second one is the material aspect of it. Is we don't use any easy to machine or easy to process materials in our parts. It's a lot of super alloys, especially copper alloys, refractory alloys, and certainly additive manufacturing can fabricate a lot of those different alloys. And I think the third and the obvious one is just the reduction in cost and schedule on that. And again, additive manufacturing, it's not for every application. And that's something that I think people are surprised when we say that, is if you can machine something, go machine it. But for those very complex parts with very difficult materials that you need a cost and schedule advantage of, then additive manufacturing may be applicable.
And I'll add in there, I think, from my perspective at an organization that's trying to develop a vehicle as quickly as we can to start launching a backlog of customers. I think one of the limitations of the aerospace industry, commercial aerospace, for the last 10 or 20 years at least, has been this movement towards an over-reliance on computational analysis for development of complex propulsion components, complex rocket components. And there's certainly a place for that, and I'm very much in the same boat of what Paul's saying, where additive doesn't work for everything. There's still a place for subtractive manufacturing. In the same vein, I would argue, it doesn't make sense to just put off all of your finite element analysis and your computational fluid dynamics. All that has a place, but I think up until recently, there's been an over-reliance on that. And that really has been because a lot of these traditional manufacturing technologies for building rocket parts were developed in the 50s and 60s, and they have flight heritage, so people want to continue to use them. But the downside is a lot of them are expensive, very long lead times. So if you have a fixed window of time where you want to design and build and flight qualify a new rocket engine, you may be limited to how many times you can iterate on a single part design. And so one of the most powerful tools in our toolkit when it comes to additive manufacturing, not from a flight component standpoint, but from being able to test and check and see how a part performs in actual operation, I think that's one of the most valuable aspects of additive to at least my company.
Okay, yeah, I'll just briefly add to that. Kevin and Paul come from a very applications background, and as a systems manufacturer, we produce a product that caters for almost any application. And so one thing we've learned is that to get the best results is you have to have a very strong application focus. And so I think we're at an inflection point generally in the industry, not just in the aerospace, but in a lot of industries where we're seeing this sort of intersection of technology with requirements and understanding. And we're going to see this greater adoption, I think, going forward. And it's really an interesting moment right now because I think there's been a lot of breakthroughs in the technology. And as Kevin mentioned, having this development cycle is a big consideration, and it's been a big barrier for additive. And I think that's something that's getting eroded very rapidly.
Yeah, so actually related to what you were just saying, if we jump back to present day, how do we evaluate how additive manufacturing is performing? Because as you mentioned, there was kind of some time ago the idea of what it could do for this industry, and now we're actually looking at, is it meeting expectations, or is there still a long way to go before it is optimized for the applications you mentioned, and for also future applications? So Brian, working for MELTIO, that develops the metal AM technology that aims to provide a higher degree of automation and autonomy. Can you tell us actually a little bit more, how does a machine manufacturer identify the needs from companies, from institutions that are trying to produce parts for this industry? And then more generally to the whole panel, what's your take on the current state of AM in aerospace? As I was mentioning, is it fair to say that we're moving beyond prototyping, so the needs and the requirements are changing, or is that not a fair assessment? So Brian first.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll take the first part of that question. So yeah, the problem is it's counterintuitive, but when you develop a tool that can target almost any application, then it's difficult to get focus. And the problem with not having focus on a particular industry is that you're not going to solve their problems in a unique way. And so you end up in a situation like Kevin mentioned, where you have this development cycle. And that's a barrier, even though it's not necessarily a technological barrier, it's an adoption barrier. So what we've done as a company, MELTIO, is that we've developed products that have a wide range of applications, but we are putting a lot of focus into different sectors. And aerospace is one of the biggest sectors that we're focused on right now. And so we're working with material testing labs, we're working with customer partners, we're developing material data sets, doing a lot of development work. So the end users can adopt the technology and get results much faster, rather than looking at a technology, thinking it's interesting, and then spending perhaps months to years on proving the applications. So we want to do as a company a lot of application studies with our partners, and provide results to the industry that can be, hit the deck running on day one. So that's really the strongest focus for us as a company. I think that's making a big difference.
Great. Paul, Kevin, do you want to jump in? Can you hear me?
Sorry.
Sorry, can you hear me, Paul, Kevin?
Yeah, I'll jump on this. So from what Kevin was saying earlier, I think it's definitely an exciting time for additive manufacturing in aerospace. And for Kevin's point about bringing hardware to the test stand and being able to do that quicker, it's a much different scenario we're in now than we were even 5 years ago, that we have hardware lined up and we're just waiting to test. Where 5 years ago, we might have only had 1 or 2 or 3 test programs a year, but now we're booked out a year on this. And a lot of that is because of additively manufactured parts. So from the development side, it's definitely really exciting. But I think we need to, step back a little bit too, and we need to proceed with a little bit of caution on this. It's very easy to get caught up in the hype of a lot of this and say, I'm going to apply additive manufacturing, but we need to understand the certification, the qualification side of it, and apply the rigor to the process. And I think that's where, moving forward, understanding the standards and really understanding the end-to-end process. I think we tend to look at additive manufacturing too in terms of, okay, I make a CAD model and I go build a part from it. But there's a tremendous amount of work on that front end and how it's designed. And really there's a tremendous amount of work on the back end too in the post-processing. And it's a lot of those steps that is going to introduce additive manufacturing as a successful application. If it's not applied without rigor and a full understanding of that process, then we could have failures and it could bring a bad name to the technology, and certainly we don't want that. So applying that rigor. Now, one other thing you had asked about too was where we're at today on this, and again, it's exciting. A few years ago, there was a very limited number of materials, and we would be making parts from materials with additive manufacturing that may not have been the best material for that application. And now we've developed a lot of new materials that are fit for that application. So I think we're going to continue to see a lot of growth in that as well.
Yeah, sorry, I think my audio cut out a minute there. I'm back on now. I would echo all of that. I think the industry has certainly grown over the past several years that Virgin Orbit's been involved in looking at the technologies. I think powder bed fusion, more commonly known as DMLS, is a little bit more mature than some of the other technologies like directed energy deposition. They do have different capabilities, and like Paul said, the certification and the robustness of your material qualification process, I think, is still undervalued. And frankly, I'm a little bit disappointed at the lack of widely accepted industrial standards that are available, because I think that one of the next big step that the industry needs to take is to have that to the level that, for example, right now, if I wanted a casting made, I can provide a industry standard spec to any number of casting houses and say, here, make me this part to this spec with witness coupons and designated and non-designated areas, and everyone will know what I'm talking about. I feel like in my experience with a lot of additive job shops, there's a wide range in the level of quality, and that can be fine if you're making a R&D component or a prototype. But when it comes to flight hardware, that's a much higher level of rigor in understanding the material properties, having control of your machines down to the level of what is the latest firmware update that your machine has. Because if you printed it on the exact same machine with a different software update before, that can change any number of things that could make that part not necessarily be qualified for flight. So I think that's really the next big step for the industry as a whole, is just to kind of coalesce around some industry accepted standards for how we establish material properties for certain additive manufacturing methods.
Great. So, I mean, kind of related to also what you were saying, but just looking more generally at the gaps. So all of the gaps and the limitations and the barriers that still exist. Could you tell us a little bit more about the impediments of AM infusion in aerospace? Kevin, maybe you want to
Sure,
continue since you were.
I can I can keep riffing off of that. I think there's a general impression, and I think this even extends to some folks who are extends outside of the people who do additive manufacturing regularly, and even a lot of people who do it, is that you have a designer come up with a CAD model, and then you give it to whoever's running the 3D printer, and then they plug it in, they go, and you get a good part. That's very much not the case. There tends to be a lot of iteration involved there, and that's even just talking about, like I said, some of the more mature additive technologies, quote unquote mature relative to the rest of them in the industry, like powder bed fusion. We have a large scale hybrid directed energy deposition system in house that we've been working on for the past 4 years, and a lot of that's just been us learning how to use it, how the materials change with differences in parameters, because like I said, there is no guiding standard. And I think part of me is intrigued by that. Like, that's one of the things that I really like about our job, is that we can advance the state of the art of some of these technologies in this area. But if we're talking about more of a widely accepted way of printing parts using different additive methods, I think there does need to be some more leadership from industrial standards organizations to get everybody on the same page there.
Yeah, I would completely agree with Kevin on all that. That I think we've shown as an industry that we can go build and test parts, and there's hundreds of examples across that. Just even exciting to see a lot of the new startups that didn't exist because didn't have the capabilities to do manufacturing, and now with additive manufacturing, even universities are doing a lot of rocket engine development. But we've shown that we need to go past that. Again, it's that infusion of the technology. And again, properly implementing additive manufacturing is probably the biggest gap. It's easy to make shapes, but it's really difficult to have a robust and a repeatable process that's tightly controlled. We've done some round robin studies where we've gone to 20 different vendors, and we've printed Inconel 625 with all those vendors, and you get back a different material from everyone. And it's not, we're not saying that it's bad in that, but we have to understand the machine that we're building on, the operator training, the powder supply chain of it, and the post-processing. And like Kevin said, there's a big gap in the standards. And I think it's not just the standards of the process itself, like how do you apply a laser powder bed fusion or laser wire DED, but it's going to be the post-processing side of that. As we've seen that companies are using all different heat treats. And if you look at wrought forms of materials, the heat treats are pretty well established, where additive, everybody's doing their own thing. So I think that needs to be well understood and standardized, and the industry needs to come together on some of that and how we're going to do that. And also, like Kevin mentioned too, there's a paradigm shift in somewhat of the culture as well, that my design engineer is almost my manufacturing engineer of sorts. They make a model, I can go send it to the machine. So now you have a lot of training of both your designers and your analysts of how they need to view additive manufacturing, and they need to have an understanding of that whole process, from concept all the way through application and all the steps that it takes. The differences in the material. I need to understand fatigue a lot more. I need to understand how the process builds parts. Again, otherwise you're not going to be successful in how it's applied.
Okay, I'd like to just briefly add to that, Carlota. Sorry, I know we're running over time. So just as a systems developer, we totally understand those end user needs that Paul and Kevin eloquently summarized. And we're supporting the different sectors, like I mentioned before, but I think on a more fundamental level, the way we look at it is it's a bandwidth problem, because you have these very high cost processors, these very high cost machines in the market. And so naturally, you're going to have a very small population of users. And when you have a small population of users, you're really protracting out over time how long it takes to gain these understandings, to prove these concepts and develop the process. So our goal as a systems manufacturer is to bring down the cost of the technology. And to give some examples of that, Kevin mentioned hybrid, and we're doing 3 hybrid projects right now in Vegas. We've reduced the cost of hybrid by almost an order of magnitude. And then we've brought in other capabilities like powder and wires. So at a systems manufacturer level, we're just trying to give those solutions to the industry and work with those partners, because we think getting more users is going to increase the bandwidth. And yeah, like any adoption of technology, that has a big influence.
And I thought you would mention at some point training and education, and maybe not having enough people who have the right training and that understand the technology completely, because it is a relatively new technology. Is that not part of the gap that exists? Is that not a fair understanding?
Yeah, so from our perspective, we spend a lot of time working with customers on it's not just, you don't just manufacture and install equipment, you have to train the customer and you have to support the customer. But rather than approach that on a case-by-case basis, we're just trying to look at it in a global sense of how do we make the technology highly repeatable, very predictable, and every user gets the same results. And like Paul mentioned, you get these results back, and every sample looks different. And why is that? So we're applying a lot of resources in our company. Literally 1/3 of our engineering technical resources are dedicated to this problem. Because if we solve it for one sector, we solve it for many sectors. And so that's how we're approaching it as a company. We're not just, here's a system, good luck, and please come back to us. It's much more in depth than that.
Paul, Kevin, do you have something to add, or we move on to the next question?
I completely agree with that. And NASA has worked on trying to infuse some standards out into the industry. And like Kevin mentioned, that this is a big gap out there. And I think this is one of our attempts, is we're seeing a lot more use of additive. And for our missions, we have to fly safely. So we had to lead the way and put some of those standards out there. And as part of that, it talks specifically about training, training your machine operators, training your technicians, training your engineers, and having the right planning in place for each part that you're building. And again, that goes through all levels of the organization, not just from your technicians, but all the way up to your CEO, of having that proper training in place. There's certainly organizations that are out there, ASTM being one, that is working towards that and trying to do a lot of training and infuse some of those lessons learned. But I think we have a long way to go on that as well.
Yeah, I would just add, I think I give a lot of credit to a lot of the folks at NASA who are having to think about these problems when it comes to qualification, because I talked a little negatively about the standards organization and wishing they could move along and put something out that everybody could use, but it's really hard to do that in a vacuum where you don't have an application that's driving a lot of those areas that you need to look into. And I think a lot of the recent work that NASA Marshall, NASA Johnson, and Glenn and some other centers have been doing over the years, both in regard to the commercial crew project that NASA is supporting, as well as the SLS rocket. There are some standards for how to organize an additive manufacturing program that have come out of that we've used to help guide some of our internal processes. And I think ultimately that's kind of how we're going to get to that industry-wide solution, is you're going to have, big organizations who can justify spending the money to develop these procedures and developing, different ways to make materials and figure out the best way to do it. And then you'll start to see other people from industry start to adopt that. So we have our own internal procedures for how we approach development, additive manufactured hardware, as well as flight and the differences between those. But a lot of that's been drawn from some of the lessons learned that we pulled from folks like NASA.
So you see organizations outside of additive manufacturing jumping in for, it's not the AM industry together, or community, I mean, that is going to find a solution for this, with the standards, everything you were just mentioning. It's
yeah, I just think it's very expensive to develop that sort of standard, and you know, I don't think, you know, organizations like, you know, ASTM has millions and tens of millions and hundreds of $millions to do that. But this has been true for decades. The U.S. government has subsidized a lot of the standard development because, you know, the military needed something or NASA needed something, and there was no standard that existed, and it's expensive to make one. But if that's what it takes to put a man on the moon, then you got to do it. So I think ultimately that's where we're going to get a lot of the best practices, kind of a combination from both industry, commercial work, and government work that's going to come together.
Okay, so I'm gonna, yeah, we still have, sorry?
Could
yes,
I just add
of course.
to that, just to yeah, I totally understand what you're saying there, Kevin. And one way we're approaching that, just as an example, so we have one industry partner. They acquired 10 machines from us just to accelerate that development work, because there were so many different applications, and they wanted to, you know, build the database, the evidence, and the data sets, and then flow that into standards, you know, and other technical bodies of work. And so they tackled that by, okay, let's have 10 different platforms. And so that's something that you know, we were really inspired about, because that just really accelerates what you can do over time, and you can't do that without having a low-cost tool. So that's just one way that we're trying to accelerate that adoption.
Okay, I was just looking at the time, and also wanted to mention to anyone that's watching that you can definitely send in your questions in the Q&A, and also vote if you want to see your question at the top, and we'll come back to those in just a few minutes. We have still time for another question, looking actually at a bit at the future of the applications of AM in aerospace. Can you tell us about future projects at your organization or company, but also in general, how do you see this space evolving in the next 5 to 10 years? So again, I think there's a lot to say on this, but if you could each bring your perspective.
Sure, I'll start on that one. So as we mentioned, we feel that there's a lot of development ahead of us. And I think we're still very early in that curve in the full adoption of it. On the NASA side, we've been heavily focused on a lot of the laser powder bed fusion, which has been the more widely adopted technology. But in the last few years, we've been exploring the direct energy deposition technology, because we're finding limits of the powder bed fusion in scale. And we want to go very large scale. Some of our components want to build are a couple meters in diameter and a few meters tall. And we can't do that with the powder bed fusion. So that's one area that I think we're going to see a lot of growth in that. And with that comes, we have to go develop the standards for that technology as well, because each process needs to be treated somewhat independently, because they're all different. They may all be additive technologies at heart, and you're adding material and welding material, but different heating and cooling rates of that. So you see different materials that come out of it. I think the other thing that we're going to see is just a significant growth of new materials available. If you look at the materials available right now in additive manufacturing, it's very small compared to the wrought counterparts. We might have a couple dozen materials that are somewhat developed, but there's thousands of materials that you can choose from in the wrought form of it. And the other area that I think we really need to see a lot of development is in the post-processing side of it. Again, we've shown that we can go print parts and we can go put them on the test stand and we can test parts, but we need to tweak some additional performance out of that. And some of that's going to be with additively manufactured parts. It's well known that the surface roughness is higher than the wrought counterparts. So we have to go improve post-processing techniques, such as the surface enhancements on that for both flow performance and fatigue performance, and in some cases aesthetics on that. So a lot of that has to grow. And with all that too, like I mentioned earlier, I think the standards have to come up to speed on those post-processing aspect of it. So it's looking at that entire supply chain as a whole. You know, in industry has to come together on some of that, both the machine vendor side of it and the design engineers and the post-processing companies and, you know, the end users of that to, again, apply it successfully.
Yeah, I would say I think in the near term, obviously, you know, our goal within our organization is to you know, field the most efficient, most reliable rocket engines we can to support our launch vehicle program, and you know, for all the reasons that we talked about earlier, the consolidation of multiple parts into single printed assemblies, optimizing materials. You know, we're going to continue leveraging the right technology for the right hardware to make that happen. So for, you know, parts that can fit in a standard size power to bed machine that are more likely to be on our upper stage engine, which is a smaller engine, that may be the manufacturing method for those. We're working hard on some very large thrust chambers that are realistically only possible using directed energy deposition. So we're going to continue pushing forward with those technologies. I think in general, the near future for additive manufacturing, I think is in some really cool applications, even outside of space launch. I think that some of the demonstrations that have been done on the International Space Station for the benefit of polymer additive, and I think they recently have launched a ceramic type additive printer up there as well, which, you know, you can imagine a station in the middle of space. If you don't have a tool, you got to be able to make it. And then you know, even looking a little further, I think some of the moon landing concepts and the potential for in situ resource utilization of lunar regolith or sediment on Mars, to use additive as a technology pathfinder to be able to manufacture things off planet Earth, I think is a great example of how broadly this technology can be utilized.
Yeah, I agree with that, Kevin, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because we have two projects related to the International Space Station, and it's something that we're really excited about. And one's using our technology, which is a laser wire process to repair structures. So if you imagine you have an orbiting platform and there's a micrometeorite damage, I think everyone's seen in the news recently about this phantom leak on the space station, and they've finally tracked that down. I think it's a hairline crack in one of the modules. But having a robotic tool that you can go in and repair structures is really valuable. And we demonstrated you can bridge over 15mm holes with a laser wire process and have a fully sealed structure. So that's one project we're working on, and we're also working on a highly compact printer. To give you a sense of the scale, it's about the size of a microwave oven, and it's designed for the express rack on the space station. Kevin mentioned there's a polymer system that's been on the station for years now, but this would be the first metal printer. And the idea is that we will do material research and material science for customers and governments, and really just pursue and explore what you can achieve in a microgravity without the buoyancy effects, and also a lot of different materials. So really exciting projects that we're involved in. But with terrestrial projects, for me, the big focus is hybrid. I know Kevin has a lot of experience there. Hybrid for me has a lot of promise. It's a one-step process for post-processing. Well, in a one-step process, you have the ability to, from start to finish, one process, and the final part comes out of the machine. And for me, that's very inspiring. It sounds like magic, and I think it has the potential to be that. And we're putting a lot of energy to make it just like that, so you don't have this long development time that a lot of end users experience in the industry. So for me, that's very exciting development. I think we're going to see a lot of large-scale additive and a lot of hybrid, especially laser wire. Laser wire is probably the most elegant process because it's 100% efficient and clean and safe.
Okay, great. Let's answer some questions from the audience. well, actually moving a tiny bit away from metal now. So most of the time when the topic of AM for aerospace comes up, it's all about metal AM, someone says. When do you think that the discussion will extend to other materials like FRP, ceramics, CMC?
I'll talk about that a little bit. So I think you're seeing that expansion right now in at least academia and some of the research labs, looking at some of the ceramic printing. I know that there's some organizations also looking at some hybrid bonding of ceramics to metals, because there's certainly applications where we need to use both. We are not doing a lot of active research on that in our labs right now, as I still think there's probably some more fundamental physics and better understanding of some of those processes, and trying to get very high density on that, and some unique alloys there. But I think there is interest on that in the future. And again, academia and some of the research labs, I know HRL being one, is very active in those areas. And again, there are going to be different applications for it, and there's going to be different situations where you're going to use that, and times where you're going to use a more traditional type process for manufacturing. So I think everything needs to be traded, even with a lot of these new developments. Just because we can use it does not mean that we should.
I don't know if anyone wants to jump in, but please do if I interrupt. Brian, did you want to say something?
Yeah. So it's two things we do is, obviously manufacturing machines supporting customers, but we do a lot of process development. And so there's a lot of materials we're working with right now. And one material we recently demonstrated, we just got lab results back actually, and the results were really great, which I was really pleased to see on our first attempt. But this material is a metal matrix, but it has a ceramic components. It's a proprietary material that's well used in the mining industry. It's a very hard-facing material, very difficult to process. So I think that's a real game changer, is to work with these really exotic materials. And again, as a systems producer, our goal is to give you the low-cost tool and support you with the research and explore these different products. Because if you've got a very high-cost tool, reality is you're going to really scrutinize what you use the tool for. And so really that's our focus, is to really open up the bandwidth. And but also internally we do a lot of research in materials, including ceramics.
We have 2 minutes, so I'm just gonna ask one last question, just so that we stay on time. So the question actually that got the most votes from Wayne Black: will aerospace companies purchase 3D printing machines in the future and make all parts in-house, or will the model be outsourced to the service industry?
I think this echoes what I said a little bit earlier. We need to have standards in place to have more robust usage of the service industry. We use both out-of-house and in-house printing. I can say my confidence would generally be higher for things that we print in-house right now. I think that companies like GE and Boeing are doing a lot more internal 3D printing for the same reason. So until we get a more robust accepted industrial standard for metal additive, I think you're still going to see companies where their flight critical parts, at least in aerospace, be trending towards building those internally more than externally.
Yeah, so I would agree with that. We do the same. We have labs that do 3D printing in-house. We also go out to a lot of service vendors, and certainly you can control the process a lot better in-house. You have direct access to all the parameters, where some of the service vendors may consider some of that proprietary. So that gets back to your certification approach, and you need to know everything about that process. From the government side, I think we're in a unique role that we're trying to do a lot of advancements of some of the low TRL technologies and help infuse that out to industry. So I think we want to see whether commercial space or primes or other industries making use of the technologies, whether in-house or at vendors. And I think ultimately it's going to take a mix of both to be successful amongst the community, because you need to have, when you have it in-house, you have a better understanding of the process, and then you might be able to provide production parts, to a external vendor with the proper rigor and implementation controls in place.
Yeah, I agree with 100% with that, Paul. Yeah, you learn by doing, and if you don't use the tool, you don't develop that really deep knowledge. I take the perspective, and our company takes the perspective that if you look at like the PC world as an analogy, a desktop computer in every home. A lot of people laughed at that idea a long time ago, and I see the same thing with metal additive. You're an R&D organization, you're a manufacturer. Yeah, you're going to want to have a metal printing system in-house. There's a lot of exploratory work you can do, very rapid time frames. And if you're in a situation where you're contracting that out, a lot of projects just won't happen, in my opinion.
Okay, well, that will wrap up this discussion. We are out of time. I'm sure we could have continued because it was very interesting, and I would like to thank you three for participating and being part of Additive Digital World today and giving your perspective and sharing your expertise on this subject. I do want to mention before we actually go back to the floor plan that we have a little contest on LinkedIn going on. So anyone that wants to post about the event using the hashtag Additive 2020, we will pick the most memorable posts, and we will announce the winner and their prize during the after work from 5 p.m. So just wanted to mention that before we end the panel. So thank you again, Paul, Brian, and Kevin. And for anyone who, we had a few questions and we didn't answer all of them, but if you're sticking around, I'm sure they'll be able to find you and maybe ask you a few questions there. So thank you all, and see you on the floor plan. Bye-bye.
All right, thank you.